Hey y'all. Tonight's episode of This Is Us. Whew, was it heavy, but was it beautiful? Tonight's episode was an episode I was not necessarily looking forward to. If you watched last week's review, I talked about coming up next week. I felt at the time that an episode focused solely on Jack's mother, who we never knew in the show, was almost a waste of time. I felt like there was so much more important story, so much more development of the plot, and while I think some of those things still are true, I think this was an episode that This Is Us felt the need to tell. They told it beautifully, and I want to explain to you why I feel that way and why my opinion changed about it. I think what I saw here the most, which was obvious through the filmmaking of this episode, was the reflection of Jack and his mother, Marilyn, and their connections. I think through this episode of dealing with the grief of losing a parent and Jack experiencing that for the first time, this was such a hard thing for him to have to go through, as it is with anyone who has to lose a parent. But what was beautifully touched on in this episode was that Jack realizes when he arrives to arrange for the details of his mother's funeral that not only has a lot of the arrangements been done by Marilyn, but she had this entire life that he's kind of left, that since he's not busied himself with the details of the funeral, that he has to learn and almost spend 2 days in her shoes and get to know this town where she lived and the people who she loved and see the life that he didn't even know that she had. And I think it's super true for even the big three, even though most of this show has been them uncovering memories of their father, learning more about him with Kevin's trip to Vietnam, meeting Nikki, learning more about their parents' experience through their relationship with their own children now. But the big three don't know everything about Jack and Rebecca. They never will, and they certainly don't know and realize everything that their parents have struggled with. They have never had express conversations about Rebecca's miscarriage of the third triplet before they had Randall, and they never discussed much of Jack's time in Vietnam beyond Kevin's trip there. And there are a lot of things, specifically this struggle of Jack losing his mother, that they never knew about. And what I think is somewhat beautiful is, even though Jack was much older when he lost his mother and the big three were much younger when they lost Jack, there is that kind of dual relationship with the fact that Jack didn't know this entire second life that his mother had, and he was able to be reintroduced to that, whereas the big three don't know everything about their father pre their lives. I think the hardest part about this, which I think specifically the book was the thing that really got me emotional, but then of course we learned in the end that she actually read that book 3 times. I think the hardest part is seeing the things that they've left unfinished, or the things that they hoped would happen that never did, the things that you just push off into the future because they're not that important for today. And I feel like seeing, or a knitting project that Marilyn didn't get to finish, Jack having to kind of look through those things, those are the most brutal. And also experiencing, even after his mother's death, the fear of his father's arrival and ruining her last kind of moments, in the sense that his father's going to come in the door, and how he and his mother allowed that to stop their relationship when it was kind of never a threat to begin with. Marilyn's relationship with Stanley was obviously a horrible and abusive one, and one that I'm glad that she was able to get out of through the help of Jack. But it is so hard to think of all the things that we allow to weigh us down, whether serious or not, that affect our relationships with others, or the things we do in life, or what we might not do because of them, and how those things may never even come to pass. And I think, especially for me, as somebody who worries about a lot of things that are completely out of my control, this hit home, because it's like, these things might never happen, and yet here I am wasting time, potentially years, just worrying about them. And so I thought that was handled very beautifully in this episode. I think this episode was also a really beautiful reminder of time, how little of it we do have, even when we say we have even less of it. Because obviously throughout the episode we see the phone calls, the 6 p.m. Sunday phone calls of Jack and his mother, and why there may or may not be time and one moment, or there's real human frustration that comes with things. And I'm sure Jack felt some resentment toward his mom for coming to see the triplets and not being able to be fully present in the moment because she's worried about Stanley arriving, or things like that. But with the busyness of life and never taking the kids to the frozen pond, there's always little things that are going to stop you from doing things in life, but eventually there's going to be no more time. And I think that's something that feels, although not in the present timeline, it's not narratively progressing anything with Rebecca's story, it is very much a thematic mirror to where we know this season is going to end with Rebecca's deathbed. and knowing that we only have so much time left with her. Just as Jack is realizing that there's all of these things he didn't get to do with his mother or things he missed out on, that's how the big three are very much going to feel towards the end of this season, and how difficult all of that is and emotional it is. This was just a really beautiful reminder to me, and I guess I'm expressing it here because I felt so moved by it, by the fact that there's never going to be enough time, so don't wait until there's no time. Like, a little time is better than none left at all. And I thought that was a really beautiful, sobering part of this episode that I just can't help but be awed by the way that the show continually has handled these tough issues of grief and loss and the complexities of just the human experience. And that sounds very grand, but this show does it in a way that doesn't feel like it's teaching you life lessons. It feels like it's just showing you a glimpse into someone else's life and helping you to glean lessons from it that you can then use in your own. And that's the part of this show that has always been beautiful, and that is the reason that I will come back to it for years and decades of my life, and I hope other people do too. And I'm sure when this inevitably is in totality on DVDs or streaming or however we watch content in the future, people will watch the show and realize how beautiful it is in its entirety, and how whole the message of this show is of family, and how each part of the Pearsons' life has been touched by these deep, horrible, bad losses and huge amounts of grief, yet there is happiness and light. Much as Kate says in the season premiere of this season, light is only beautiful because there is darkness, or something to that extent, and that's just the way that this beautiful, beautiful show is able to give us all hope, or at least me hope, every Tuesday night when it comes on. I also feel like what was so beautiful was that regardless of how the theories of this season end up, regardless who Kevin ends up marrying or how Toby and Kate get divorced, no matter how the little Pearson clan, all of the grandchildren grow up and what they become, and no matter how exactly Rebecca does end up forgetting and eventually meet the end of her story, I feel like this show is so beautiful because it is, although this is a low moment and something we hate to think that we or our loved ones will ever have to go through, death is just as much a part of life as birth and beginnings and just everyday things. And I feel like just as Jack went through this with Marilyn, and the big three are about to go through it with Rebecca, the big three's kids are eventually going to have to go through it with them. And while that's a horrible thing, it's somewhat beautiful, and knowing that there's love and beauty and wonderful memories that persist through all of those cycles of life and death. And I don't want to be like a like a light and dark person today, but I feel very profoundly moved by this episode. But what did you think about it? Please let me know in the comments down below, and if you have any other maybe nitpicky things that I'm not seeing in the emotional moment of this episode, please let me know. I'd love to hear them. But be sure to like this review if you did enjoy it, and consider subscribing, because I do This Is Us reviews each week for the entirety of season 6, because I love this show dearly and I want to talk to more people who feel the same way. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing night, and I will see you all in my very next video. Bye, y'all.